Marcus Williams never imagined that a 20-minute visit to the hospital would change two lives forever. What started as a desperate attempt to earn $50 for groceries would set in motion a chain of events that a tech billionaire would spend months trying to unravel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in St. Mary's Hospital cast harsh shadows across Marcus Williams' weathered face as he approached the blood donation center. At 24, he looked older than his years, the kind of exhaustion that comes from working 3 part-time jobs and still falling short of making ends meet. His worn sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, a sound that seemed to announce his presence to everyone in the sterile corridor. Marcus clutched the crumpled flyer in his pocket, the one he'd found taped to a telephone pole outside his apartment complex. Emergency blood drive minus $50 compensation for rare blood types. $50 meant groceries for 2 weeks if he shopped carefully. It meant his electricity wouldn't get shut off again. Most importantly, it meant he could afford the bus fare to his job interviews next week. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes named Carol, looked up from her computer screen as Marcus approached. Her smile faltered slightly as she took in his appearance. The faded jeans with patches at the knees, the t-shirt that had seen better days, the hollow look of someone who'd been skipping meals. "I'm here about the blood drive," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "I have O-negative blood." Carol's expression brightened immediately. "Oh, wonderful. We desperately need O-negative donors right now. Let me get you started with the paperwork." As Marcus filled out the forms, he couldn't help but notice the commotion happening in the emergency wing. Doctors and nurses rushed past with urgent expressions, their conversations filled with medical jargon he didn't understand. Something about a car accident, a young boy, in critical condition. Dr. Jennifer Patterson emerged from behind the reception desk, her scrub still clean but her face etched with concern. She was the kind of doctor who radiated competence, the type who could remain calm in any crisis while still showing genuine care for her patients. "Mr. Williams," she called out, scanning the waiting area. Marcus raised his hand tentatively. "That's me. Thank you so much for coming in today. I have to be honest with you. We have a critical situation. A 10-year-old boy was brought in an hour ago after a severe car accident. He's lost a significant amount of blood, and his type is extremely rare. We're running dangerously low on compatible donations." The weight of the situation settled on Marcus's shoulders. This wasn't just about his $50 anymore. Somewhere in this hospital, a child was fighting for his life. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus asked, without hesitation. Dr. Patterson led him into a private donation room, different from the usual setup with multiple beds. This room was equipped with more sophisticated machinery, designed for emergency situations. A nurse named Thomas began preparing Marcus for the donation, checking his vitals and ensuring he was healthy enough for the procedure. "Have you donated blood before?" Thomas asked as he cleaned Marcus's arm with antiseptic. "A few times in college," Marcus replied, "but never in a situation like this." Through the small window in the donation room, Marcus could see medical staff moving with controlled urgency. He caught glimpses of a man in an expensive suit pacing in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the anguish written across the man's face. The donation process began, and Marcus watched his blood flow through the clear tubing into the collection bag. Each drop represented hope for a child he'd never met, a family he'd never know. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, someone who could barely afford his next meal, potentially saving the life of someone who might never know his name. "You're doing great," Thomas said, monitoring the flow. "Your blood pressure is perfect, heart rate is steady. The boy is lucky you came in today." 20 minutes later, it was over. Marcus felt slightly lightheaded, but otherwise fine. Dr. Patterson returned with a clipboard and an envelope. "Mr. Williams, I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your donation is going directly to the patient. He's in surgery now, and thanks to you, he has a real fighting chance." Marcus accepted the envelope containing his $50, but the money felt different now. It wasn't just compensation. It was a reminder of the morning when his own struggles had intersected with someone else's crisis. "Will he be okay?" Marcus asked. "It's too early to tell definitively, but the surgeons are optimistic. Your blood type is incredibly rare. Less than 7% of the population has it." Finding a compatible donor this quickly, it's nothing short of miraculous. Quote, as Marcus prepared to leave, Dr. Patterson stopped him. I know this might sound strange, but would you be willing to leave your contact information? Not for the family. We maintain strict confidentiality, but in case we need to reach you for future emergencies, donors with your blood type are precious. Marcus nodded and scribbled down his phone number and address on the back of a hospital form. His handwriting was careful, precise, the handwriting of someone who'd filled out countless job applications and knew the importance of legibility. Walking out of the hospital, Marcus felt an odd mixture of exhaustion and purpose. The $50 in his pocket would solve his immediate problems, but something deeper had shifted. For the first time in months, he'd been able to help someone else, to make a difference that went beyond his own survival. He had no way of knowing that 3 floors above, in the hospital's most expensive private room, a man named Richard Blackwell sat beside his son's bed, holding the boy's small hand while machines monitored every breath, every heartbeat. Richard had built a technology empire worth billions, but all his money meant nothing if he couldn't save the most important person in his world. The boy, Christopher Blackwell, lay unconscious, his face pale against the white hospital pillows. The surgery had been successful, but the recovery would be long and uncertain. Richard had already spoken with the hospital's administration about finding and thanking the donor, but privacy laws made it impossible to obtain any information. What Richard didn't know was that the person who'd saved his son's life was at that very moment walking to a bus stop 6 blocks away, counting and recounting the $50 that would keep his electricity on for another month. Marcus Williams had no idea that his simple act of kindness had just connected him to one of the most powerful men in the country, setting in motion events that would transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus Williams walked out of St. Mary's Hospital with $50 and a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The money had served its purpose: groceries, electricity bill, bus fare for job interviews. But the memory of that morning lingered in ways he hadn't expected. Marcus had finally landed a position at Henderson's Auto Repair, a small garage on the outskirts of downtown Portland. The pay wasn't much, barely above minimum wage, but it was steady work, and Marcus had always been good with his hands. The smell of motor oil and the sound of wrenches against metal had become his new normal, a welcome change from the uncertainty that had plagued his recent months. Jake Henderson, the garage owner, was a gruff man in his 60s who believed in second chances and hard work. He'd hired Marcus based on a simple philosophy: show up on time, work hard, and don't give me any trouble. Marcus had been doing exactly that, arriving 30 minutes early each day and staying late when needed. "Williams," Jake called from beneath a lifted sedan. "Grab me the socket wrench set from the back room." Marcus wiped his hands on his coveralls and headed to the storage area. As he searched through the tools, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost ignored it. Telemarketers and debt collectors were frequent callers, but something made him answer. "Is this Marcus Williams?" The voice was professional, female, vaguely familiar. "Yeah, who's asking?" "This is Carol from St. Mary's Hospital. You donated blood a few weeks ago during our emergency drive." Marcus's heart skipped. "Is everything all right? Is the boy okay?" "The patient made a full recovery thanks to donors like you. But I'm calling because we have another situation. A different patient, but the same rare blood type. Would you be available to come in today?" Marcus glanced at his watch. It was 2 p.m., and Jake had mentioned they might close early due to a parts shortage. "Yeah, I can be there in about an hour." "Perfect. Ask for Dr. Martinez when you arrive. And Marcus, thank you." The drive to the hospital gave Marcus time to think. He'd been following news about the car accident online, searching for updates about the boy's condition. The local newspaper had run a story about the crash, a wealthy family's son who'd been critically injured when their car was hit by a drunk driver. The articles mentioned the boy's remarkable recovery, but never revealed the family's identity, citing privacy concerns. Dr. Elena Martinez was younger than Dr. Patterson, with the focused intensity of someone who'd built her career on precision and quick thinking. She met Marcus in the same donation room he'd used before, but this time the atmosphere felt different, less frantic, more routine. "Mr. Williams, I understand you've been through this process recently. This patient is a middle-aged woman who suffered complications during surgery. Your blood type is exactly what we need." As the donation began, Dr. Martinez explained more about rare blood types and their importance in emergency medicine. People with your blood type are universal donors for other rare types, but you can only receive from very specific donors. It makes you incredibly valuable in situations like these. Valuable, Marcus repeated, finding the word strange. He'd never thought of himself as valuable to anyone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, across town in the executive offices of Blackwell Technologies, Richard Blackwell was experiencing his own transformation. His son Christopher was home now, weak but recovering steadily. The 10-year-old had returned to school part-time and was slowly regaining his strength, but the experience had fundamentally changed Richard's perspective on life and priorities. Richard had spent the past 3 weeks trying to find the anonymous donor who'd saved his son's life. Every conversation with hospital administrators hit the same wall: patient confidentiality laws that protected donor identities. He'd consulted with lawyers, made discreet inquiries, even considered hiring private investigators, but every avenue led to the same dead end. The frustration was consuming him. Richard was a man accustomed to solving problems with resources and determination. He'd built his company by identifying obstacles and systematically dismantling them. But this was different. This was about gratitude, about a debt that money couldn't easily repay. His assistant, Amanda Chen, knocked on his office door. "Mr. Blackwell?" the hospital called. "Christopher's follow-up appointment has been moved to Thursday." Richard looked up from the stack of legal documents he'd been reviewing, another attempt to find a way around privacy laws. "Amanda, what would you do if someone saved your child's life and you couldn't even thank them?" Amanda considered the question carefully. She'd worked for Richard for 8 years and had seen him navigate countless business crises, but never with this level of personal investment. "I think I'd find another way to help people, to honor what that person did." Her words struck something deep in Richard's mind. He'd been so focused on finding the specific donor that he'd missed a broader opportunity. What if he couldn't thank one person, but he could help many? Back at the hospital, Marcus was finishing his second donation. Dr. Martinez handed him another envelope with his compensation, but this time also included a small card. "What's this?" Marcus asked. "Information about our regular donor program. Given your blood type and your reliability, we'd love to have you as a consistent volunteer. The compensation isn't much, but it's steady, and you'd be helping save lives regularly." Quote, Marcus studied the card: regular donations, scheduled appointments, a small but dependable income supplement. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, the stability was attractive, but more than that, it was the feeling he'd experienced 3 weeks ago, the sense that his existence mattered to someone else. "I'll think about it," he said, tucking the card into his wallet. That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment, eating a dinner of canned soup and crackers while scrolling through news on his phone. A headline caught his attention: "Local tech billionaire announces $50 million healthcare initiative." The article detailed Richard Blackwell's plan to establish emergency blood banks throughout the state, focusing on rare blood types and underserved communities. The initiative would provide free health screenings, compensate donors fairly, and ensure that critical shortages like the one that had nearly cost his son's life would be prevented. Marcus read the article twice, struck by the timing. He had no way of knowing that his blood had saved the son of one of the most powerful men in the region, or that his anonymous act of kindness had inspired a philanthropic effort that would help thousands of people. The next morning at Henderson's Auto Repair, Marcus worked with renewed focus. He'd decided to join the hospital's regular donor program, not just for the money, but because he'd found something he was good at, something that mattered. Jake noticed the change in his demeanor. "You seem different lately, Williams, more settled." Marcus tightened a bolt on an engine mount, considering his response. "I guess I figured out that even small things can make a big difference." Jake nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of thinking that builds character. Keep it up." What neither Marcus nor Richard realized was that their lives were about to intersect in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about fate, gratitude, and the unexpected connections that bind strangers together. The foundation had been laid, but the real story was just beginning to unfold. 2 months into his regular donor schedule, Marcus Williams had developed a routine that brought structure to his otherwise chaotic life. Every other Thursday, he would leave Henderson's auto repair during his lunch break, take the bus to St. Mary's Hospital, donate blood, and return to work with enough time to grab a sandwich from the vending machine. The extra $150 per month had transformed his financial situation from desperate to merely tight, but the psychological impact was far more significant. Dr. Martinez had become familiar with Marcus's story through their brief conversations during donations. She learned about his struggle to find steady work, his determination to rebuild his life after a series of setbacks, and his genuine concern for the patients who received his blood. Unlike many donors who focused solely on the compensation, Marcus always asked about outcomes, recovery rates, and whether his contributions were making a difference. "You know, Marcus," Dr. Martinez said during his 6th donation, "I've been working in emergency medicine for 12 years, and I've never seen a donor who cares as much about the patients as you do." Marcus watched his blood flow through the familiar tubing, a process that had become almost meditative. "I guess when you don't have much to give, you want to make sure what you do give matters. Have you ever considered a career in healthcare? With your attitude and dedication, you'd make an excellent medical technician or paramedic." The suggestion caught Marcus off guard. He'd never considered healthcare as a viable path. The education requirements, the costs, the time commitment all seemed impossibly out of reach for someone in his situation. But the seed was planted. That afternoon, instead of returning directly to the garage, Marcus stopped by Portland Community College's admissions office. The building was bustling with students of all ages, and he felt simultaneously inspired and intimidated by the energy around him. A counselor named Mrs. Janet Rodriguez was available for walk-in consultations. "I'm interested in medical programs," Marcus told her, feeling slightly foolish. "But I'm not sure I can afford it, and I need to keep working full-time." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled warmly. "Let's talk about your options. There are several programs designed for working adults, and there's significant financial aid available for students with demonstrated need." As she outlined possibilities, emergency medical technician certification, phlebotomy training, medical assistant programs, Marcus began to see a future he hadn't imagined. The conversation lasted an hour, and he left with a folder full of information and an application for the spring semester. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwell's healthcare initiative was gaining momentum beyond his wildest expectations. The Blackwell Foundation's Blood Bank program has partnered with hospitals across 3 states, establishing mobile donation units and implementing advanced tracking systems to prevent shortages. The project had attracted national attention, with other philanthropists pledging matching funds and medical organizations offering expertise. But Richard's personal mission remained unfulfilled. Despite the success of his broader initiative, he couldn't shake the need to find the specific person who had saved Christopher's life. His search had become more sophisticated. He'd hired a discreet research firm to analyze hospital records, cross-reference donation schedules, and identify potential donors based on publicly available information. All within legal boundaries, but pushing the limits of privacy protection. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah Mitchell, the research firm's lead investigator, discovered that St. Mary's Hospital had participated in a local news feature about rare blood donors 6 weeks after Christopher's accident. The segment didn't reveal names, but it included interviews with several donors, filmed from behind or with faces obscured. "Mr. Blackwell," Sarah explained during their weekly meeting, "we've analyzed the voice patterns from the news segment and cross-referenced them with other available data. One donor stands out, a young man who mentioned working in auto repair and living in the downtown area. His donation schedule aligns perfectly with your son's emergency." Richard felt his heart race. "How certain are you?" 85% confident. "But here's the thing. Even if we're right, approaching him directly could violate privacy laws and hospital policies. We need to find another way." The solution came to Richard during a sleepless night 3 days later. Instead of trying to circumvent the system, he would work within it. He would visit St. Mary's Hospital personally, not as a billionaire seeking information, but as a father expressing gratitude to the entire donor program. Dr. Patterson was initially skeptical when Richard requested a meeting. She'd dealt with wealthy patients before who expected special treatment or access to confidential information. But Richard's approach was different. He wanted to establish a permanent appreciation program for regular donors, complete with health benefits, educational scholarships, and career development opportunities. This isn't about finding specific individuals, Richard explained to the hospital's ethics committee. This is about recognizing the extraordinary contribution that regular donors make to our community. They're not just giving blood, they're saving lives, and they deserve more than token compensation. The program launched on a Thursday, the same Thursday that Marcus arrived for his routine donation. As he walked into the hospital, he noticed increased activity in the donor center. New equipment, additional staff, and several people in professional attire observing the operations. Carol, the receptionist who had processed his first donation, was practically glowing with excitement. "Marcus, perfect timing. We're launching a new donor recognition program today, and you're one of our featured participants." Featured participants? The foundation that's sponsoring our new equipment wants to highlight the impact of regular donors. They're offering scholarships, health benefits, even career counseling. Would you be interested in hearing more? Marcus followed Carol into a conference room he'd never seen before. Inside, a well-dressed woman named Jennifer Walsh explained the program's benefits. As she spoke, Marcus recognized elements from his conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez at the community college: tuition assistance, healthcare coverage, professional development opportunities. "This sounds too good to be true," Marcus said honestly. "I understand your skepticism," Jennifer replied. But the foundation's benefactor has personal experience with the importance of blood donation. He wanted to create something meaningful for the people who make this life-saving work possible. What Marcus didn't know was that Richard Blackwell was watching the interaction through a one-way window in an adjacent room. After months of searching, he was finally seeing the person who had saved his son's life. The young man was exactly what Richard had imagined: genuine, humble, someone who clearly understood the value of hard work and human dignity. Dr. Patterson joined Richard in the observation room. "That's Marcus Williams. He's been one of our most reliable donors, and he always asks about patient outcomes. Dr. Martinez thinks he'd make an excellent healthcare professional." Quote, "What do you know about his background?" "Not much beyond what he's shared during donations. He works at an auto repair shop, lives alone, and has been trying to get back on his feet after some difficult times. He's never missed an appointment, never complained about the process, and he genuinely cares about helping people." Richard watched Marcus ask detailed questions about the scholarship program, taking notes on a small pad of paper with the careful attention of someone who couldn't afford to miss important details. This was the person who had saved Christopher's life, not a fellow millionaire or medical professional, but someone who had given what little he had when it mattered most. The meeting concluded with Marcus agreeing to participate in the program. He would receive full tuition coverage for his EMT certification, health insurance during his studies, and a guaranteed position with the Foundation's emergency response team upon graduation. In return, he would continue his regular donations and serve as a spokesperson for the program. As Marcus left the hospital that day, his head spinning with possibilities he'd never dared imagine, Richard made a decision. He wouldn't reveal their connection, not yet. Instead, he would ensure that Marcus had every opportunity to succeed, to build the life he deserved, and to continue making the difference that came so naturally to him. 6 months later, Marcus Williams stood in his EMT uniform, having just completed his certification with honors. The transformation was remarkable, not just in his career prospects, but in his confidence and sense of purpose. He was working part-time with the Foundation's Mobile Response Unit while finishing advanced training, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same hospital where he'd once donated blood out of desperation had become the launching point for a career he'd never imagined possible. He still donated regularly, but now he understood the medical science behind the process, the impact on patients, and the critical importance of the work he'd been doing. Richard Blackwell attended Marcus's graduation ceremony, sitting in the back row with other Foundation representatives. Christopher, now fully recovered and back to his energetic 10-year-old self, sat beside his father, unaware that the young man receiving recognition on stage was the reason he was alive. As Marcus accepted his certificate, he looked out at the audience and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. He thought about the morning he'd walked into St. Mary's Hospital with $50 in mind and a desperate need to survive. He couldn't have imagined that his simple act of giving would create a ripple effect that would transform not just his own life but the lives of countless others through the Foundation's work. Richard watched with quiet satisfaction as Marcus shook hands with his instructors and posed for photos with his classmates. The young man still didn't know that his blood had saved a billionaire's son, or that his anonymous generosity had inspired a multi-million-dollar healthcare initiative. But Richard knew, and that knowledge filled him with a profound sense of justice and hope. After the ceremony, as families celebrated with their graduates, Richard approached Marcus in the parking lot. It was the first time they had spoken directly. "Congratulations on your graduation," Richard said, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Blackwell, with the foundation that sponsored your education." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Blackwell, I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. This program has changed my life completely." "Actually," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion, "I should be thanking you. Your commitment to helping others, your dedication to the donor program, that's what inspired this entire initiative." "I just did what anyone would do," Marcus replied, genuinely puzzled by the intensity of Richard's gratitude. Richard smiled, knowing that Marcus's humility was exactly what made him extraordinary. "Not everyone would do what you did. Trust me on that." As they parted ways, Richard felt a sense of completion he'd been seeking for almost a year. He had found a way to honor the person who saved his son's life without violating privacy or creating obligation. Marcus would continue his career in emergency medicine, never knowing that his spontaneous act of kindness had connected him to one of the most powerful families in the country. But perhaps that was exactly as it should be. Some acts of generosity are meant to remain anonymous, their impact measured not in recognition or reward, but in the lives they touch and the futures they make possible. Marcus Williams had given his blood to save a stranger, and in return he had received something far more valuable than money. He had discovered his purpose and found his place in the world. The story came full circle not with revelation, but with transformation. Two lives had intersected at a moment of crisis, and both had emerged fundamentally changed. One had learned the true power of giving, while the other had discovered the profound impact of gratitude expressed through action rather than words. Sometimes the most meaningful connections between people are the ones they never fully understand, but carry with them forever. 3 years had passed since that pivotal graduation ceremony, and Marcus Williams had evolved into one of the most respected paramedics in the city. His reputation for compassion and clinical excellence had spread throughout the emergency medical community, earning him assignments to high-profile cases and leadership roles within the Foundation's rapid response teams. What distinguished Marcus wasn't just his technical skills, but his unique ability to connect with patients during their most vulnerable moments. The Foundation's mobile unit, emblazoned with the Blackwell Healthcare Initiative logo, had become a familiar sight throughout Portland's neighborhoods. Marcus often found himself working in areas similar to where he'd grown up. Communities where ambulance response times were historically longer, where residents sometimes delayed seeking medical help due to cost concerns, where a familiar face and genuine empathy could mean the difference between cooperation and resistance. On a rainy Tuesday morning in October, Marcus received a call that would test everything he'd learned about life, medicine, and the interconnectedness of human experience. The dispatch came through his radio at 6:47 a.m. Unit 23, Priority 1 response, single vehicle accident on Highway 84, pediatric patient, possible internal injuries. Marcus and his partner Lisa Chen, a veteran paramedic with 15 years of experience, raced through the early morning traffic toward the accident scene. The details were sparse but troubling. A 10-year-old boy whose family's car had skidded on wet pavement and struck a concrete barrier. The similarities to another accident from years past weren't lost on Marcus, though he had no way of knowing just how eerily parallel the situations truly were. At the scene, Marcus encountered chaos that had become familiar yet never routine. A luxury sedan was crumpled against the highway divider, its front end completely destroyed. Firefighters were working to extract passengers while police redirected traffic around the accident. The driver, a woman in her 30s, was conscious but clearly in shock, repeatedly asking about her passenger. "My nephew," she kept saying. "Please, you have to help Christopher. He wasn't responding when I called his name." The name sent an inexplicable chill through Marcus, though he couldn't place why. He focused on the task at hand, working alongside Lisa to assess the boy's condition once the firefighters had safely extracted him from the vehicle. Christopher was unconscious, his pulse weak but steady, with obvious signs of internal bleeding and possible head trauma. "We need to move fast," Lisa said, her voice carrying the urgency that comes with experience. "This kid needs surgery, and he needs it now." As they worked to stabilize Christopher for transport, Marcus found himself studying the boy's face. There was something familiar about his features, though Marcus was certain he'd never seen this child before. The feeling persisted as they loaded the stretcher into the ambulance and began the race to St. Mary's Hospital. During the transport, Marcus established an IV line and monitored Christopher's vital signs while Lisa navigated through traffic with practiced efficiency. The boy's condition was deteriorating, his blood pressure dropping despite their interventions. Marcus made the decision to radio ahead to the hospital's trauma team, requesting that they have O-negative blood standing by. The patient is approximately 10 years old, unconscious, showing signs of significant internal bleeding, Marcus reported. Will need immediate surgical intervention and multiple units of blood. ETA, 7 minutes. Dr. Martinez, now the hospital's chief of emergency medicine, was waiting at the ambulance bay when they arrived. She took one look at Christopher and immediately began issuing orders to her team. As they rushed toward the trauma bay, she caught sight of Marcus and nodded with the kind of professional recognition that comes from years of successful collaborations. "Good call on the blood request," she said as they transferred Christopher to the hospital gurney. "His type is rare, but we keep extra units on hand now thanks to the Foundation's program." The irony of the situation was staggering, though none of the participants could see it yet. Christopher Blackwell, now 13 and significantly taller than when Marcus's blood had saved his life 3 years earlier, was once again fighting for survival in the same hospital where their lives had first intersected. The donor program that Richard had established in gratitude for his son's earlier rescue was now providing the resources needed for Christopher's second chance at life. Marcus stayed at the hospital longer than his shift required, something that had become his habit when dealing with pediatric cases. He found himself in the waiting area, still in his uniform, when a familiar figure burst through the emergency department doors. Richard Blackwell looked older than Marcus remembered from their brief graduation encounter, his face etched with the same desperate worry that Marcus had witnessed in countless family members over the years. Richard spotted Dr. Martinez emerging from the trauma bay and rushed toward her, his usual composure completely abandoned. "How is he? Please tell me he's going to be okay." "Mr. Blackwell, Christopher is stable now. The surgery was successful, but he lost a significant amount of blood. Fortunately, we had compatible donors available through the Foundation's program, and our response time was excellent thanks to the mobile unit crew." It was only then that Richard noticed Marcus sitting nearby, still in his paramedic uniform. Their eyes met across the waiting room, and Richard felt a jolt of recognition mixed with confusion. The young man who had transformed from desperate blood donor to accomplished paramedic was now part of the team that had saved his son's life for the second time. Marcus stood and approached Richard, his professional demeanor intact despite the emotional weight of the situation. "Mr. Blackwell, I was part of the crew that brought Christopher in. Dr. Martinez is right. The surgery went well, and he's expected to make a full recovery." Richard stared at Marcus for a long moment, pieces of a complex puzzle suddenly falling into place. The timeline, the location, the blood type requirements, everything aligned with a possibility he'd never considered. "Marcus," Richard said slowly, "can I ask you something? Have you been donating blood at this hospital for a long time?" "About 3.5 years now," Marcus replied, puzzled by the question. "I started during an emergency drive, actually. A young boy needed a rare blood type, and I happened to match." Quote, the weight of realization hit Richard like a physical blow. The person standing before him, the paramedic who had just saved his son's life, was the same person who had saved Christopher 3 years earlier. The anonymous donor he'd spent months trying to find. The inspiration behind his entire healthcare initiative. The young man whose education he'd funded without ever revealing their connection. "Marcus," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think there's something you should know." Over the next hour, as Christopher recovered in the pediatric ICU, Richard revealed the truth that had shaped both their lives for the past 3 years. He explained about the first accident, the desperate search for the donor, the decision to create the Foundation as a way of honoring anonymous generosity. Marcus listened in stunned silence, as the pieces of his own story were rearranged into a pattern he'd never imagined. "You mean the scholarship program, my education, my career, all of it happened because—" Marcus trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Because you gave blood to save a stranger's child," Richard completed. "Because when you had almost nothing, you still found a way to help someone else." That's the kind of person the world needs more of, and I wanted to make sure you had every opportunity to continue making that difference. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Martinez, who approached with a smile that indicated good news. Christopher is awake and asking for his father. He's going to be fine, Mr. Blackwell. Complete recovery expected within a few weeks. As Richard hurried toward his son's room, he paused and turned back to Marcus. Would you like to meet him? Properly this time? Marcus followed Richard into the ICU, where Christopher was sitting up in bed, looking remarkably alert for someone who had just undergone major surgery. The boy smiled when he saw his father, then looked curiously at Marcus. Dad, who's this? Richard put his arm around his son's shoulders. Christopher, this is Marcus Williams. He's the paramedic who brought you to the hospital today. But more than that, he's the person who saved your life 3 years ago, when you were in your first accident. Christopher's eyes widened with understanding and gratitude that seemed mature beyond his 13 years. You're the blood donor? The one Dad's been trying to find forever? Marcus nodded, still processing the magnitude of what he'd learned. I guess I am. Quote, Thank you, Christopher said simply, for everything. Dad told me about all the people the foundation helps now because of what you did. As Marcus looked at the boy he'd unknowingly saved twice, he felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with a desperate need for $50 had closed in the most unexpected way possible. His spontaneous act of giving had not only saved a life, but had created a foundation that would save countless more lives in the years to come. The story of Marcus Williams and Richard Blackwell had become something larger than either of them could have imagined, a testament to the power of anonymous kindness, the importance of paying forward generosity, and the mysterious ways that lives intersect and transform each other across time and circumstance. Standing in that hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the quiet bustle of medical professionals, Marcus understood that his journey from desperate donor to accomplished paramedic was just the beginning. He had found his calling not just in emergency medicine, but in the deeper truth that saving lives is about more than medical training. It's about recognizing the fundamental connection between all human beings and acting on that recognition, even when no one is watching, even when there's no reward in sight. The foundation would continue to grow, touching more lives and creating more opportunities for people to help each other. Marcus would remain at the center of that work, no longer anonymous, but still driven by the same impulse that had brought him to St. Mary's Hospital on that first desperate morning. And Christopher would grow up understanding that his life had been saved not just by medical skill and technology, but by the simple human capacity for selfless generosity. Some stories end with revelation, others with resolution. This one ended with both, and with the understanding that the most powerful forces in human experience are often the quietest ones. The moment when someone chooses to help a stranger, the decision to turn personal gratitude into public good, and the recognition that every life saved has the potential to save many others. In the weeks following Christopher's second recovery, the relationship between the Blackwell and Williams families evolved into something neither had expected. Richard invited Marcus to family dinners, not out of obligation, but from genuine appreciation for the young man's character and perspective. Christopher, fascinated by Marcus's work as a paramedic, began asking detailed questions about emergency medicine and expressing interest in pursuing healthcare himself. Marcus, do you think I could become a doctor someday? Christopher asked during one of these dinners, his youthful enthusiasm infectious. I think you could become whatever you set your mind to, Marcus replied. But more importantly, I think you already understand something that takes some people years to learn, that helping others is one of the most rewarding things you can do with your life. The Foundation's influence continued expanding beyond blood donation programs. Richard had established scholarship funds specifically for emergency medical training, created mobile clinics for underserved communities, and partnered with medical schools to provide hands-on experience for students from low-income backgrounds. Marcus found himself serving as a mentor in many of these programs, sharing his story with young people who reminded him of his former self. During one particularly memorable visit to a community college, Marcus addressed a group of students considering careers in emergency medicine. Many came from backgrounds similar to his own, working multiple jobs, struggling financially, uncertain about their futures, but driven by a desire to help others. I won't lie to you, Marcus told them. The training is demanding, the work is physically and emotionally challenging, and there will be days when you question whether you're making any real difference. But I can promise you this, every person you help, every life you touch, creates ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. One student, a young woman named Maria Santos, approached him after the presentation. She was working as a housekeeper while taking pre-med courses, sending money home to help support her younger siblings. Her story resonated deeply with Marcus's own journey. "I keep wondering if I'm crazy to think I can become a paramedic," Maria confided. "Everyone tells me to be realistic about my limitations." Marcus smiled, remembering his own doubts during those early days at the community college. "Maria, 3.5 years ago, I was donating blood just to pay for groceries. Sometimes the most unrealistic thing you can do is underestimate your own potential." With Richard's support, Marcus arranged for Maria to receive a full scholarship through the Foundation's program. She would become one of dozens of students whose lives were transformed by opportunities that traced their origins back to that first desperate morning when Marcus had walked into St. Mary's Hospital. The Foundation's impact extended internationally as well. Richard's healthcare initiatives attracted attention from philanthropists worldwide, leading to partnerships that established similar programs in developing countries. Mobile blood banks, emergency training centers, and donor recognition programs began appearing in regions where such resources had never existed. Christopher, now in his sophomore year of high school, had indeed chosen to pursue medicine. His personal experience as a patient, combined with his admiration for Marcus's work, had given him a unique perspective on healthcare that impressed his teachers and mentors. He volunteered at the Foundation's community outreach events, often working alongside Marcus to help train new donors and educate the public about emergency preparedness. "You know what's funny?" Christopher remarked to Marcus during one of these events. "I used to think about that first accident as the worst thing that ever happened to me. Now I realize it was actually one of the most important things that ever happened to our entire family." Richard, overhearing the conversation, felt a profound sense of satisfaction. His son had grown into a thoughtful, compassionate young man who understood that adversity could be transformed into opportunity with the right perspective and support system. The Foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary with a gala that brought together hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by its programs. Donors, scholarship recipients, medical professionals, and community leaders gathered to share stories and recognize achievements. Marcus, now serving as the Foundation's Director of Emergency Services, delivered the keynote address. "5 years ago, I made a decision that I thought was about survival," he told the assembled crowd. "I needed $50, and donating blood seemed like the fastest way to get it. I had no idea that choice would connect me to this incredible community of people who believe in the power of giving, learning, and supporting each other." As applause filled the ballroom, Marcus caught sight of Richard and Christopher in the front row. Richard's eyes were bright with pride, not just for the success of his foundation, but for the young man who had unknowingly inspired it all. Christopher, now 17, and preparing for college applications to pre-med programs, wore the confident smile of someone who had found his purpose early in life. The evening concluded with the announcement of the Foundation's newest initiative, a nationwide network of emergency response training centers that would prepare the next generation of paramedics, EMTs, and emergency medical technicians. Marcus would oversee the program's development, ensuring that students from all backgrounds had access to the education and support they needed to succeed. Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Marcus and Richard found themselves alone on the hotel's rooftop terrace, looking out over the city lights. The conversation turned reflective, as it often did during their quieter moments together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't answered that call 3.5 years ago?" Richard asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think about it sometimes, but then I realize that wondering about different choices misses the point. What matters is that when the moment came to help someone, I chose to act. Everything else grew from that single decision." Richard nodded, understanding the deeper truth in Marcus's words. The Foundation, the scholarships, the lives saved and transformed, all of it had originated from one person's willingness to give what little he had when it mattered most. As they prepared to leave, Marcus pulled out his phone to check his schedule for the following day: 3 blood donation appointments, a training session with new paramedic candidates, and a meeting with hospital administrators about expanding the mobile unit program. His calendar was full, but every item represented another opportunity to continue the work that had begun so unexpectedly years before. The story of Marcus Williams and Richard Blackwell had become a living testament to the exponential power of generosity, proof that a single act of kindness, performed without expectation of reward or recognition, could generate waves of positive change that would continue expanding for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.